Good afternoon. It's always a great pleasure to be the last speaker on the last day on the last panel. So I will be pretty quick. So first of all, the title. It probably should have been called Space Tourism, Human Nature. And for various reasons you'll get into, but it's human factors. What is a space business consultant speaking on engineering, medical, and psychological issues, called as human factors? You may ask, why is a business consultant doing this? And there's very good reasons. First of all, my qualifications. I was the flight surgeon and From the Earth to the Moon for episode 6. So I get to use the great line, I'm not a doctor, but I play one on TV. So I do have some flight surgeon experience. But Apollo 11. Could someone hit the, I don't know what's flipping, but just, thank you. So, but there are legitimate reasons why a business person, especially what I do, which is primarily finance, strategic partnerships, business plans, investor relations, governmental regulations, I do that into the business. The reasons I'm concerned about this is because we have to acquire insurance, which is very important. As a matter of fact, for suborbital, I predict the first person you can buy a ticket from is not going to be the first person who's technically there. It's going to be the first person who has third-party liability insurance. So remember, you heard it from me. The first person you can buy a ticket from is the first person to get insurance, not the first person who's ready to go. Unless you're 100% self-funded, you have to pass a due diligence. And investors are going to look at the safety, the training, the medical, and all those sort of internal requirements that the FAA may not recommend or may not mandate, but your investors may. You have to market and demonstrate safety. So, you're going to have to show the public what you're doing. So these are the reasons why I'm concerned about this. You also have to make the experience as pleasurable as possible. At this conference, and I have not been able to say things because I have confidentiality agreements signed with certain clients, but the G's are higher than expected, especially on the returns. I'm glad it's now on the public and I can say that. I have been very concerned about this. You also have to demonstrate why your operation is better than someone else. So when I'm telling someone to invest in one company versus another company, a lot of these factors involve, why should you invest in A as opposed to B? And that's why I'm involved. The other reason, and this is probably the most important for lots of reasons, you have to minimize the impact of one spaceflight participant on another. Imagine what happens. You pay $200,000. There's 5 or 6 of you, depending, and you're sitting across from the guy who screams the entire flight, throws up, and has to be restrained while you're doing 0G. You pay $200,000 for that wonderful experience. So that probably minimizing the impacts on other spaceflight participants is huge. Human factors is an umbrella term, and it's basically how people interact with technology. And we'll get into more details, but that's the definition of what it is. I'm doing my master's at Florida Institute of Technology in human factors for space, which is interesting because I first have to get a degree in aviation human factors, and then they add on space. So, yeah, it's interesting. And here are the areas of interest and of human factors, and we'll get to a few that truly affect the participant. Situational awareness. User interface is not as important for the participants as it is for the pilots, which we won't go into. Human performance is very important because if for no other reason, people have to perform safety procedures if something goes wrong. And that, from the insurance point of view, people have to be able to perform safety procedures. If they cannot, someone like myself will not approve a program for insurance or investment. So that's very important. And from the aviation world, most mistakes are human errors. Most incidents occur because of a human problem. Very seldom is it 100% technical or mechanical. The other thing too is we will now see individual differences. Everyone has touched upon today, we're going to be flying average people. Astronauts are highly skilled, highly trained, and highly selected. This will not happen. We will have huge individual differences, and it will be very interesting once the numbers start going up. So, okay, here's what investors in insurance are concerned about, and there are some words here that you have never heard before at a space conference. Primarily, you probably all skipped ahead to suicide. This happens on the airline industries, that there is a percentage of people, someone somewhere will think it would be cool to kill themselves in space. That's just a plain simple fact. I don't know if it's 1 in 40 million people, and then you have to get how many people could afford to do it, how many people could plan it. But these are the things you're concerned about. Panic is probably one of the number one things to be concerned about, which we'll get into more detail. Sickness, we kind of expect a certain level of sickness, so that's not too scary. Death is one we'd like to avoid. Accidents, we expect accidents. There are ways to mitigate accidents. There are things that you can plan for certain types of accidents. That is also expected. Bad experience, believe it or not, I would probably say 50% of the problems, 50% of the things that I look at on the different vehicles is the quality of the experience. And the one thing you want to avoid with other people and human factors is creating a bad experience. The other thing is a delay in flight schedule, because programs will be stopped internally and externally. And you do not want to have things that happen that can be preventable that cost you money because you have to delay your flight schedule because you have to come up with a new procedure, a new screening method, or something to delay. Delay in flight schedule is also a delay in the day you make a profit. So that is huge concern. Believe it or not, suicide and things like that are an issue. Litigation. If you don't do the other things well, you're more likely to be litigated. The other thing too is, well, all of us are preventing the operators from being sued. No one has mentioned, I can sue a fellow passenger. I could sue him for ruining my trip. I have not heard one person mention that. So think about it too, what happens when I can't sue the operator because I've signed 13 waivers, but I can sue my passenger who threw up on me, was screaming the entire time, and ruined my trip. So that's also something, and it has not been addressed in any legislation either. An injury. Injuries tend to also happen in panic situations, so we'll get to that too. Not cool and not exciting. This is the other interesting thing about human factors, is that you want the experience to be dynamic and impactful and yet be safe. So these are some of the things, not all, but these all have either green, yellow, or red lights on my little charts when I'm doing this for a client. I think one of the best ways to lead and to establish new industry is to follow by example. And let me tell you, one of the best examples in the industry is what Zero G did with, in quotes, the vomit comet. As you know, for 2 decades, NASA, well, for actually more than that, 3 decades, NASA was the only one who was doing this on a continuous basis, and it got the nickname the vomit comet. Zero G had to come along, and they had to do a commercial model. Well, much to everyone's surprise, they reduced the air sickness rate from about 1 out of 4 to 2 out of 4 to, it was pretty significant, to about 1 out of 27, 1 out of about 28, which is very, very impressive. They did it in a record amount of time too. And let me tell you how they did this. One, they medicated, and they did some good research. They use a cocktail combination, and they give you scopolamine, and the other thing they give you to offset its reaction is about 1/3 of that tablet is caffeine. So they really studied what the cost trade-offs were of medication. They found out most people get sick after 25 parabolas. Did I spell parabolas right? Yep. They get sick after 25. NASA typically did 40 parabolas in a flight, whereas if they had just studied internally, NASA would have stopped, at 25, but they normally did 40 or much more. I mean, there's some people who have done, I think 150 was the record. It was a huge number. So they just said most people get sick after 25. We're stopping at 25. Last flight I was on, we did 21. No one got sick. One of the crew got sick. One of the coaches got sick because they didn't medicate and they thought they could get away with it. The other thing that Zero G did was that they also realized that people got sick when you go straight to zero Gs. So what they did is they start you off with 1 Martian parabola or 2 Martian parabolas, which is 1/3 G, then a lunar parabola, 1/6 G, and then you go to zero G. So they acclimate you to the environment. So they also truly educate the participants. And I was a bit shocked I went to their first training, which held back a little on some of the data, and I went on their most recent training, and they pretty much tell people exactly why you get sick, why the vomit comet's called the vomit comet, and make you truly conscious of that you don't need to get sick. I was kind of in shock last time I went, and the flight I was on, again, no one got sick except the one crew member. The other thing they did is that there are no windows on the zero-G plane. There's some in the door, but it's completely enclosed, and one of the reasons they do that is because when you're going up before you hit the arc, you would be at this angle, and you would see the clouds at that direction and coming down. By not doing that, you have no reference point, and so your brain is not trying to correct what you're feeling with what you're seeing, so there's no windows. You're also lying flat on the floor, which they found out too, is if your head's pointed up, that it makes you feel better. So the model here is study exactly what your impacts are of your program and how to mitigate for them. I think Zero-G did an outstanding job. And while some of these can be applied to suborbital, I sort of think the same methodology, especially the first 100 flyers, you're going to find out why did they have a reaction, why did they panic, why did they tighten up, why did they stop breathing for a second, why did they hold their breath for 30 seconds. You're going to find out the reasons why people do this. Then you come up with the mitigating strategy for it. So I think Zero-G is a great model. The other model to look at is tandem skydiving, and there's some real interesting things with people who seek adventure and what goes on here. We'll have about a week training for most suborbital programs. They're between 5 and 6 days is almost what everyone's doing. Some are 3 days. But it appears to be a week training. It's going to be the industry average, whereas tandem skydiving is 1-day training. It's very safe. You're more likely to die by a lightning strike. However, there are deaths. And worldwide, in tandem, there's been about 60, the bulk of which are equipment failures. And then there were 2 heart attacks and a 3rd suspected. And there's 2 drownings. It was in Hawaii, and they actually landed in the surf, and the parachute got caught in some rocks. And panic participants occur. And the one nice thing about having a group who panics is you can actually study them. I'm still trying to determine what my thesis is, and it is going to be on suborbital screening. And one of the things to screen for is for panic. What is most likely to occur? One of the most interesting things I learned is that everyone's familiar with fight or flight. That is actually not a term used anymore because it's fight, flight, or freeze. And it's a very interesting phenomenon. It's one of the differences between your reptilian brain and your mammalian brain. There are a lot of survival situations, and a lot of military people can attest to this, of where it's very good to freeze and not move and stay still. So people want to fight, they want to flee, or they freeze. And in tandem skydiving, a lot of people think they panic when they tandem skydive. They really don't. They have the adrenaline rush. Their sensories become overwhelmed for a second. That is not panic. That is just getting the adrenaline rush. So you have a lot of people who tandem skydive who tell you they panic. They have really not panicked. They just had a full sensory experience and had an adrenaline rush. But what the tandem skydivers report is about 1 in 50 panic with no consequences. And one of the advantages of tandem skydiving, one of the reasons you're in front is so you really can't hurt the guy behind you. It's very hard to actually cause harm to him. And some of the panic only lasts for a few seconds and they realize they're okay. Some of it lasts the entire duration of the jump. Now, the more serious one is that about 1 in 1,000 report an injury or someone trying to unharness themselves. And that's one of the common things is they start, they feel confined and they start grabbing for things they shouldn't be grabbing for. That has not been studied. That is one of the things I am looking at is that response. What type of person does that? That is a key. But most tandem sky jump coaches, and the nice thing about tandem skydivers and the instructors is that they have high number of flights, of drops, and they can start having they have lots of things to report. But the bulk is that what they find is that more people freeze than panic. and there's a consequence to that. Here are the typical physiological stress responses, which, it's typical, and people are going to have to make a determination: are people going to wear diapers or not? If you know it's going to happen out of 1 out of 300 people, are you going to make them all wear diapers, or you just tell the people, hey, it happens about 1 out of 300 times, you can wear a diaper or not? Lots of things about informed consent is just letting people know what the consequences are. People get dry mouth and other things. So that's just a typical response. Now, what are the consequences of panic? You have stressed passengers, which may not be a bad thing if they're fully restrained. And the next thing that happens, and this is bad, is it stresses the other passengers. When you hear someone screaming, it stresses the other people, so you raise the incidence of other people panicking. One of the interesting things too that happens too, if one person gets airsick, another person is likely to get airsick too. So this you want to prevent as much as possible. Panic is also the start of other physical problems. Your blood pressure goes up, and all sorts of other things that happen. If you also have a medical condition and your blood pressure hits a certain level, you can trigger other medical conditions. And the one that I'm most concerned about is unable to perform safety procedures. If a person is panicked, they are not in condition to let themselves out of a seat or to evacuate an aircraft. It also causes problems to abort the flight. If the person panics before the engines are lit, on most of the vehicles there's no problem with the boarding. However, once the buttons hit, and that's the likely point where they'll start to panic, there's nothing that can be done, especially depending on what vehicle. The engines are lit, they're going. So, and the other one too is people who panic, who start grabbing for things, they can injure others. Other interesting thing too about when one person panics, a pilot or a jump instructor may ignore a real problem. Someone panicking is not necessarily a real problem if they're under control. However, if a person's worried about a panicked person and they don't realize their chute didn't fully deploy, that's a real problem. So you tend to focus on the panicked person, and that's one of the things people are going to be trained for, is to make sure you're still doing all your other checklists and not paying 100% attention to the panicked person. So how do you prevent panic? You train, you simulate, you educate, you rehearse, and you acknowledge. Now, Marshall did a very good job of how one should be trained, and I don't need to go into detail there. Simulation is extremely important for lots of reasons. If you simulate, people feel more comfortable. Now, simulation is not the real experience, and fortunately, people psychologically know this. So a person may not panic in a simulator. You may, however, find out, oh, they're claustrophobic. Oh, they don't like dark places. There's certain reasons why you'll see things in certain designs. I can tell you, someone told a Virgin Galactic to have a white cabin because it'll appear bigger no matter what. So they're going to minimize the psychological impact. So whoever their designer is, I can tell you, he said, no, we're going with a very, very light color of white to do that. Educate. There are some interesting things about panic and stress and motion sickness. You can actually tell people tricks, and you can actually tell them you're telling them a trick, and it won't affect the result. For example, one of the best ways to prevent panic is to actually give people something to do. One of the best things to give someone something to do is, 1 minute into acceleration, you have to check on the person beside you. You have to do a thumbs up so they see you're okay. They have to do a thumbs up, you're okay. Believe it or not, when a person is worried about another person or know they have something to do, they're less likely to panic. You can actually tell the person that, and it doesn't impact the benefit of that. So there's certain things about just telling them the truth that works. There's all sorts of psychological things too, like there probably should be a clock on board, and probably when they're accelerating for the engine burn, that the clock should start ticking at about halfway through the procedure, so that they know they're more than halfway through and they can make it to the end. So if it's going to be a 3.5 minute burn or a 3 minute burn, at a minute 30 seconds, they see the clock ticking down and says, oh, I made it halfway. I'll make it all the way. Now, if you start a clock at 100%, people panic because they mentally, oh my God, I have 90%, I have 80%. So there's some good internal tricks you can do. Rehearsing is a very good thing, especially rehearsing the outfit and the environment. And then acknowledging. This is probably the hardest thing, and there was allusions made, and since he said it, I can bring it up. I happened to be able to speak to Anusha and to Dennis Tito, and both said very similar things about their reentries. And it was Anusha who said she was advised, she wasn't trained. And she had done all this training for Ascent and felt very confident about that, but she said she was advised on reentry. It was much louder, it was much scarier, the G's were higher, and parts of the spacecraft flying by was pretty scary. So there's something to be said for acknowledging that it's truly dangerous, and here are the dangerous parts. Acknowledgement actually makes people feel more comfortable. So if Dennis had spoken to Anusha, it probably would have been better. So I know Space Adventures has addressed it. Their next person, that is being changed. The other thing too is, you had Channel 5 who had very bad reentries. The other ones were what was expected. So let me get you. What did I do here? Now, how do you simulate actual stress? Now, there's some good physiological ways to simulate stress. Centrifuges are great because a G is a G. You're pulling 2 Gs, 5 Gs, 4 Gs, and you can do it for the exact period of time. Now, the good thing about this is you'll quickly find out if people are comfortable with this. Number 2, if there's a medical condition that you're not screened for, it may appear, it's much better to appear on the ground near a facility and with a physician on hand that can address it. So centrifuges are absolutely wonderful. 0G is great because you're actually doing the 0G portion. And high performance aircraft are great, which I'll get to in a second. But the other thing too is you stair step stress levels. You stair step people up and they become more comfortable. You do the easiest things first. And people will peak. Some people will say, I'm done, I did the 0G, I don't need to do any more. And there's some people who just keep going. As a matter of fact, Dennis Tito, I don't think truly intended to go to space until, was it MiG-25 or MiG-29? One of them, where they were going straight up, they got to like 90,000 feet, and he wanted to keep going. So that's how Dennis was sold until he did that MiG flight, he was going to people will adapt. This is absolutely great. People who have a bad experience on a centrifuge rise or on 0G will come back, and their second and third and fourth time are much better. As a matter of fact, in tandem diving, it's rather interesting. There are quite a few people who have panicked, screamed all the way down, have truly panicked, and then said, it was the greatest experience of my life, and then do it again, and then they don't panic. So there is some good news about that. The other thing that I'm very big on, and I have found this out working with children, working with adults, is while they're promoting a lot of activities for friends and family, during the screening process, I truly advise not to have friends or family or your buddies. The other group that panics on skydiving are macho buddies, because a macho buddy will pretend he's okay until it actually happens. So I'm very supportive of individual training, and you can actually train with 6 other people, but you really shouldn't know them. So, because people do more than they want, friends, family, girlfriends, boyfriends, and their buddies. So that is something we all need to watch out for. So now, I'm a big supporter of aircraft training, and you'll see why in a second. Aircraft training is actually dangerous. It's very, very safe, but people know they're actually at risk, as opposed to a centrifuge or a simulator where they know they're on the ground. So this truly separates one person from another. And I'll tell you a little story about Pepsi sponsored a prize for a MiG ride. The girl won the prize, went to Russia, and she went through the training, did very well. She's on the tarmac, headed out to go. She freaks out on the runway. The pilot turns around, and there's Pepsi with a film crew, and she doesn't make it. Now, fortunately, she had taken her boyfriend with her, and her boyfriend sat through class, and the guy at Pepsi said, "Do you want to go?" and put her boyfriend on the plane, and they were able to shoot the commercial. But she thought she was okay until she was headed down the runway. Similar things can happen. You much rather have that happen on an L-39 or a T-38 or an F-104 than happen in a suborbital vehicle. There's something about, your wheels are going to leave the ground that makes it very important. Real safety procedures. You have real safety procedures on high-performance aircraft. Whether it's closing your own canopy, seeing the white lights coming on, that you have oxygen. You have real safety procedures that the person has to perform. The person learns how to communicate with the pilot. So there's real safety procedures, and you get a sense that the person can perform. You get to pull high Gs. That, again, is not in a controlled environment of a centrifuge. You have real physical and mental stresses. And you also have confining equipment, which also seems to be another problem. A lot of people don't do well with a lot of safety equipment. So now, this is what I did on April 17th. I did a mock suborbital flight in an F-104 to simulate the sonic effect at the Kennedy Space Center, because we wanted to see if we could fly out of the shuttle landing facility, go to the zone, and do this sonic test, and do as much of the orbital profile that you could in an F-104. Learned a lot from this flight. There were some very interesting things. Number one, well, I'll get to some of them, but unexpected things happen. Now, the one thing that happened is that the F-104 actually travels faster than the carry vehicle for Spaceship Two, and actually travels faster than the rocket plane when they're under the jet engines. And so when we did the flight profile, we averaged both Spaceship Two and average rocket plane to do a sort of average profile. We had to hit very precise marks because we had sensors for the sound. Normally, a suborbital vehicle will not have to hit precise marks, but we did because we were doing it for a very specific test. What happened is, because we were traveling so fast, the pilot had to go long for us to hit our marks. Because we're going so fast, we get to the marks early. So he went long, meaning we were at 90 degrees to the horizon, going this direction, which, well, I was well trained. When you're looking, why are the clouds this direction? was a bit disconcerting. And why are we moving this direction? And of course, he didn't have time. We were going so fast, he didn't have time to tell me the reason why. So the good thing about aircraft is things happen. You don't always go by your flight plan. Real Gs are real Gs, and let me tell you, with your safety equipment and a real environment, pulling 5 Gs is very different than being in a simulator. I had to record the data when we went sonic, when we went subsonic, and things like that. I was in shock how much slower I was moving than I thought. So there were some real impacts. The other thing that happened was coming back was that you have to activate your ejection seat. You have to pull a pin out, and you have to hold it up. But on the way back, you have to put your ejection seat pin back in to save the seat. Well, you have an adrenaline rush. You have all the safety equipment on, and you're sitting there trying to get this little pin back in to a little hole. So I was also thinking about that, how safety procedures, you have this adrenaline rush, how are you going to do these things? And on the design reviews I'm going to now, I'm advising people to have very big buttons, very big controls, so that you have no doubt. I mean, if it's a little pin or a little button, you want a big button that people can hit and not miss. So, and believe it or not, the people who are designing the safety procedures are very aware of these things, and they seem to be doing all the right things. I would like to stress, though, for marketing reasons, and I've been very nice to the companies, they're underplaying what the physical and psychological impacts are going to be. Marshall said he thought the number one impact is going to be psychological for screening. I agree. I think medical is going to be what it's going to be. You know, one company says 80% of people are going to fly. It's probably much less than that. Psychologically, though, you're going to want to screen the people. As our flight profile, we went sonic doing this because almost all the vehicle, to keep the air control surfaces active as long as possible, will be going, horizontal. Then they go vertical, and that's exactly what we did. As we're going up like this, and they have two rear view mirrors in the F-104. I'm looking up and go, the normal houseway from Ohio is going to have a problem with this. And that was my first thought as we were doing that. So it is rather dramatic. Pulling the G's, accelerating is very dramatic. The other thing about human nature and human factors, there are some very physiological things that just happen that the designers have to be a little better about. One of the things I'm concerned about is if you ever want to get yourself truly sick, take an office chair, spin yourself around in one direction, and then tilt your head down lower than 20 degrees. What happens is, in your ear, you have two circular canals, and they're perpendicular to each other. The fluid spins one direction as you're going in motion, and then if you move off axis 20 degrees, it starts spinning in the other direction. Now, one of the bad things when you're laying on your back, people, by human nature, look out windows. It's just, many people are going to tilt their head past 20 degrees. I have made my recommendation to have, mirrors at 45 degrees, the unbreakable mirrors, the safety mirrors, so that people are not tilting their heads to look out windows. I think it's going to be a number one problem. One group is, may have video monitors to out the tail end. So, but if you have a window right beside you, your natural inclination is to do that. And the second you do that, the fluid in your ear starts moving the other direction, or actually counter to it. And the other interesting thing about that feeling is, if you've ever done it, most of the time, because you're moving slowly, your body averages out the difference. So if the fluid's moving one direction, it feels like you're moving like this. If it starts spinning the other direction, it feels like you're moving like this. And most of the time, if that happens and you're slow, your body averages out and you feel like you're going like that. You get this sensory input. When you're going at high speeds and you don't have points of reference, it actually feels like you're going like this and like this at the same time. It's very disoriented. And what happens when your brain can't reconcile the two, you do tend to get sick. So that's the other problem too. There's some really easy tools that people do not believe. Closing your eyes is one of the best ways not to get sick, to lower your visual input, because 80% of your information comes through the eyes. If you just close your eyes and you train people to do this, you can alleviate a lot of problems. So it comes down to training and I cannot stress this enough, is that the rehearsing, the educating, the simulation, and the training, and the acknowledgement is just the key to all of this. It'll make the experience much better. And I also think that the best experience is going to be the one with the best training experience, because you truly don't want people wasting their 5 minutes in 0 Gs. You don't want people missing the views out the window because they're going for an airbag. So the person who can do this the best will probably have the best experience for their people. The other thing too is people want to use cameras. I truly advise against that. 0 G hires professional photographers. All the ships will have video cameras and still cameras. Looking through a viewfinder also gets you sick. So, and even looking at a video monitor gets you sick. So just abandoning the cameras is another great way to keep people from getting sick. The other thing too is that there will be the first person who panics in space, and hopefully it's no one in this room, and hopefully it's a minimal panic. It will happen, and we need to screen for it, and we need to prevent it, and we need to acknowledge it. And the physical requirements of this are going to be greater, especially now that people are releasing the return. Gs are going to be higher. We all have to adapt programs to make that training realistic and to let people know how severe the impact is going to be on return. The other thing too is when people are told things, it's amazing. If they have done tests they put people in tanks of water, or in shower stalls basically, and said the water's going to come up to your hip. People stand there and the water comes up to your hip, no stress level. The water's going to come up to your shoulder, no stress level. The water's going to come up to your chin, no stress level. If you do the same experiment and you don't tell people where the water's going to stop, their blood pressure goes through the roof. They start to panic. They start to hit the door. But if you tell people exactly what's going to happen, they'll sit there and their blood pressure will go up 10, 15%. It won't double or anything. So I'm a big one for telling the people what they're going to experience. It truly helps. So, are there any questions? Yes.
On your medication,
Yes.
do you recommend calming and caffeine?
Yeah, they have a patented free drugs, but the caffeine, because the other one makes you a little drowsy, the caffeine actually. And the other thing too is I self-medicate when I go on 0G. I drink about a half a Red Bull when I go, and just sort of. I take a little ginger and a Red Bull, so that's what I do. That's mine. So.
Yeah. On the camera policy, once you're actually in orbit, and you're at at that point, any transition things are not going to really be happening to people. Would it be possible if you were going to let people bring cameras only, kind of keep them stowed until you actually get to the 0G portion?
Well, if they practice on the 0G plan, I have no problem with that. It's just that a lot of people get distracted and things. And the more you practice, if they have them, in their pocket, in their leg, and can make them out and take the pictures they want, that's fine.
Yeah. I can see during the thrust phase or the reentry phase, that turning effect you were talking about would be a real big problem.
With you. On the insurance, let me put on because I do due diligences and I find people insurance. One of the problems with the cameras, and I'm going to be one of the terrible, evil people, a camera, a 12-ounce camera at 7 Gs, you don't want that hitting someone in the head. You do not want that in someone's chest. You do not want to have something that hit the stomach. So someone like me is going to say, listen, your safety procedure, camera stowed, is going to have to happen 1 minute before you even start pointing Gs all the way back down, or no cameras at all. So especially with the higher Gs, loose objects in cabins are not a good thing. So I'm going to be one of the naysayers on cameras. And people will also, by nature, want to use the larger cameras. So it does become a safety issue.
Okay.
Yes.
You talk about for training. You talk about training for passengers when another passenger panics, what they should do or not do if that happens. That someone starts screaming their lungs out and the rocket engines light up.
Well, I'm recommending a buddy system for lots of reasons, but that is one of the things that you can do. Depending on the vehicle, and the FAA has not mandated anything yet. Some of the vehicles will have a co-pilot, and some may even have an attendant. So that would be one of the jobs of the attendant. There's not much you can do as you're pulling G's accelerating up. There are things you can do once you stop accelerating. So once the engine's light, that's the part. Now the thing is, are you going to have a safety restraint system that the person cannot release themselves from during acceleration? And at what point are you going to make that 5-point release able to operate by the person themselves? Because you don't want to have a restraint system where the vehicle crashes off the runway and the person can't release themselves. So there are ways designed around that. But if you truly don't want a person releasing themselves, but at the same time you don't want to restrain them 100% where they have no control over their own getting out of the seat.
That might add to the panic level.
Yes.
And do some web pages on the topics?
No, but I can put them up. I can email you. So, Florida Institute of Technology, by the way, is just now starting a commercial suborbital training and flight research center. So, Florida Institute of Technology, we just got money 2 days ago. We'll be starting a suborbital training research center, and it's more for the research of training, not for the actual training. It is a training and research center, but it's to do the research on how to train people, if that makes sense. So Florida Tech will be doing that. Yes.
In the area of psychological Can you expand on screening for claustrophobia or other personality disorders? Prior to even getting into
Sure.
the
Sure.
simulation.
There are some good psychological tests which seem rather benign. They ask, do you like this activity? Do you like that activity? And just by the nature of the activities, you can tell if someone has some claustrophobic tendencies. Then they have some other things. They start with the what you like, and they go, what do you dislike? And on the dislikes, you really get a feel for people. So there are some profile tests. The other thing, too, is putting them in simulators. Dark simulators, cockpits are great things. You quickly find out if someone. As a matter of fact, the number one test I found out, because a lot of people can fake being claustrophobic, is when you put on an oxygen mask. It's amazing how many people cannot do that. So.
Do you think an MMPI is a useful tool?
It is from a scientific point of view, but the thing is, if you're going through the numbers of people, it's not cost effective, and it's not worth doing for the 1 out of 400,000 person. I mean, it's going to be very hard to screen for the suicidal person unless it's blatantly obvious. It's just like the 2 deaths on mission space for Disney. The woman should not have gotten on the ride. She had such high blood pressure. She should have screened herself. As a matter of fact, I can tell you both deaths, Disney was not sued because the medical implications were so obvious. That woman's blood pressure was so high, she should have self-screened. She should have never gone on the ride. The 4-year-old kid's a little different story. He just had an unknown heart condition, which every year in my community, we have one basketball player, one football player a year drop dead, and it's the same heart condition. So it's not cost effective to screen everyone getting on a ride for a heart condition that happens 1 out of 40 million, 1 out of 14 million, 1 out of 14 million. It's just not cost effective. So you come up to the same. Now, for the first 100, I would advise it. After that, the costs just get too burdensome. So, thank you.